Mr. Edwards for 5 minutes.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of the American Relief Act. The basis of this bill, we all know, is a continuing resolution to fund the government to prevent us from shutting down until sometime into the first quarter. Now, I admit, I think we all know a continuing resolution is not the best way to fund our government, nor to be responsible for our taxpayers' dollars. We have an appropriations process that should work, and to the credit of Chairman Cole, that did work through the Appropriations Committee, and I certainly appreciate the Chairman's strong leadership in getting us through that. And it's noteworthy that he pointed out the Appropriations Committee by itself does not get to determine how we fund our government. We've got many needs and necessary reasons to keep our government functioning. The American people are counting on us. Our military, our border guards are counting on us. Our enemies are watching. We all know North Korea, Russia, China, and others do not have to face issues such as a government shutdown. And also, keeping the government open is critical to the district that I represent in Western North Carolina. But I'd like to just take a moment and speak specifically to the disaster relief portion of this bill. As most of you are aware, North Carolina was hit by Hurricane Helene on September the 27th of this year, and we experienced unprecedented disaster and destruction. It's going to cost North Carolina about $58 billion to rebuild. This storm was the most deadly in North Carolina's history. We lost 126,000 homes that were either damaged or destroyed. Countless people are now homeless. I want to thank Speaker Johnson for personally visiting Western North Carolina, getting his boots muddy and seeing what we were dealing with there. I'd like to thank Leader Scalise for visiting Western North Carolina. And Chairman Cole also took time to come down. Many other members were there. We're going to see a number of members on this floor argue against this bill. Mr. Speaker, I need to remind you that folks in Western North Carolina have been paying their taxes for decades that have gone towards funding disasters in every other part of this country, from California to the Midwest to the Gulf Coast, without argument. But Mr. Speaker, now North Carolina needs our help. They need the help of this body. I'm sure some folks are going to speak against this bill. I urge you to think about the disasters that you may have experienced and what you've seen in the news and what you're hearing from me about the need in Western North Carolina. I even heard one member last week refer to recipients of disaster relief as coastal elites. I represent about 783,000 people in the mountains of Western North Carolina, and I can promise you not one single one of those is a coastal elite. Those are hardworking, tax-paying Americans that deserve the help of this body at this time, and I urge passage of this bill. I must also say that I'm disappointed, even though there's $110 billion in here to help begin to rebuild my great state. There is a provision for private roads and bridges that was stripped out of this for some reason in the last moments of pulling this bill together. The folks from FEMA in Western North Carolina have told me the most significant difference that they see in this disaster versus those they've dealt with in other areas are the number of private roads and bridges that we have. And so I'm hoping, and I appreciate Chairman Cole offering to help me get this provision back in with some other vehicle at some other point in the future. So, members, I urge your support of this bill. North Carolina deserves and needs the respect and the help to rebuild. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentleman from Connecticut.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, the distinguished Democratic leader, Mr. Jeffries.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank the distinguished gentlelady from the great state of Connecticut, our top Democrat on the Appropriations Committee, for yielding and for her incredibly strong and steadfast leadership during this process. House Democrats, House Republicans, Senate Democrats, and Senate Republicans reached a bipartisan agreement to fund the government, prevent a shutdown, and meet the needs of the American people. We reached a bipartisan agreement to provide disaster assistance to people who had their lives turned upside down by extreme weather events, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and wildfires all across America. We reached a bipartisan agreement to be there for farmers and families, children, seniors, working class Americans all across the country. The men and women who serve this country in uniform and are veterans. House Republicans have abandoned that bipartisan agreement that we entered into in good faith. A bill that House Republicans negotiated gave us your word that we were going to move forward together on behalf of the American people. It was a Republican-drafted bill that was posted by House Republicans. And then one or two puppet masters weigh in, and the extreme MAGA Republicans decide to do the bidding of the wealthy, the well-off, the well-connected, millionaires and billionaires, not working-class people all across America. The bill that is before us today is just part of an effort to shut down the government. Unless we, as representatives of the American people, bend to the will of just a handful of millionaires and billionaires, because the provisions in this bill, particularly as it relates to suspending the debt ceiling for 2 years, are designed to bring about a massive tax cut, unpaid for wealthy donors and for wealthy corporations, for millionaires and billionaires who clearly some in this Congress are working for. And this bill is validation for it. Now, what's been interesting to me is that for decades, the Republican Party has lectured America about fiscal responsibility, about the debt and the deficit. It's always been phony. This bill proves it. The one thing we do know is that every time a Republican president comes into office, the one thing we can count on Republicans to do is to pass a massive tax cut for wealthy Americans, and in the process, stick working-class Americans with the bill by raising the deficit and the debt. That's what happened in the 1980s when Ronald Reagan was president. The biggest thing that he did was pass a massive tax cut for the wealthy and the well-off, paid for by working families and middle-class folks all across the country. Didn't do anything for middle-class Americans. Didn't do anything to stimulate the economy. This whole notion of trickle-down economics. Come to the conclusion that trickle-down economics simply means that middle-class families, that working-class Americans may get a trickle, but they're guaranteed to stay down. That's what your economics are all about. Massive tax cuts for the wealthy and the well-off under President Reagan continued into President Bush. Bill Clinton comes to office, inherits a significant deficit, and under his stewardship, President Clinton turns a deficit into a surplus and passes that surplus to President George W. Bush, the so-called party of fiscal responsibility. And once again, we see the same exact playbook. Republicans inherit a surplus, and they immediately blow it to pass massive tax cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected, not provide relief to working class Americans. A tax cut in 2001, unpaid for, and then a tax cut in 2003, unpaid for. And they continue to run up the debt and the deficit, prosecuting two failed wars. The so-called party of fiscal responsibility want to lecture America when your record speaks for itself. President Obama comes in after mismanagement related to the prior administration, including helping to trigger the Great Recession, inherits a deficit from a Republican president of $1.5 trillion, as well as the Great Recession. And working under the leadership of President Obama, Democrats in the House and the Senate get the situation turned around, and over an 8-year period of time, reduce the deficit by $1 trillion, from 1.5 trillion to 500 billion. Progress under Democratic leadership as it relates to getting America's fiscal house in order. And then Donald Trump comes to office and again follows the same exact playbook. After failing to take health care away from millions of Americans, the Republicans turned their attention to the GOP tax scam, where 83% of the benefits went to the wealthiest 1%. Why? To subsidize the lifestyles of the rich and shameless. And in the process of doing that, borrow $2.3 trillion added to our debt, explode the deficit, so-called party of fiscal responsibility. In fact, this debt that we're dealing with, that Democrats are taking seriously, that Republicans have no interest in being responsible around, that's what this 2-year suspension of the debt ceiling is all about. In our nation's 248-year history, 25% of our nation's debt was accumulated during the 4 years of the former president. 25%. How dare you lecture America about fiscal responsibility, ever? And then President Biden comes to office, gets big things done for the American people on infrastructure, on the CHIPS and Science Act, standing up a clean energy economy, rescuing America from a once-in-a-century pandemic, gets all of these big things done, partnering with House Democrats and Senate Democrats. And in the process, in his first 2 years, reduces the deficit by $1.7 trillion. And so we see a very clear pattern. The facts speak for themselves. Democrats are the party of getting things done and fiscal responsibility. Republicans are the party of massive tax cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected, which bring us to this very moment. Because this bill is designed to set up the GOP tax scam 2.0. To stick the American people with a bill so you can continue to cut taxes for wealthy donors and well-connected corporations and jam working-class Americans. That's what this bill today fundamentally is all about. That's why Republicans are suspending the debt ceiling for 2 years, the so-called party of fiscal responsibility. And in addition to these massive tax cuts, we know how you want to pay for it. Many Republicans have said this in the public domain, that we want to end Social Security as we know it, end Medicare as we know it, end Medicaid as we know it, end nutritional assistance as we know it, not support our veterans. These are all the reasons why Democrats are opposed to this legislation. Because you're trying to jam working-class Americans again, as you have repeatedly done over and over and over again. Those are the facts. The other problem with this bill is that we negotiated in a bipartisan, bicameral way, real progress for working-class Americans, for middle-class Americans, for everyday Americans who aspire to be part of the middle class. That has been cut out of this legislation. Why would you do that? Why would you eliminate funding for community health centers? That impacts the heartland of America, urban America, rural America, suburban America, small-town America, Appalachia. Why would you cut out funding for community health centers? We're fighting for those everyday Americans. That's why we're opposed to this legislation. Why would you cut funding for nutritional assistance for children in America, for seniors in America, for veterans in America? Why would you do that? This bill cuts funding for nutritional assistance that had previously been agreed upon, and that's why we're opposed to this legislation. This legislation actually cuts a program that was designed to help children and their parents detect cancer. Cruelty is the point. Why would you eliminate that program? We're going to fight for the children of America. And so the reasons are too numerous to articulate. Though with my magic minute, I could do that. But we've laid out the challenges with this bill, the phoniness in claiming that extreme MAGA Republicans are about working-class Americans or the party of fiscal responsibility. Nothing could be further from the truth. When you run up the debt and the deficit, middle-class families pay, working-class families pay, and we are going to defend them. House Democrats are going to continue to fight for working families, middle-class families, all those who aspire to be part of the middle class, for the children of America, for the seniors of America, for the unions in America, for the veterans of America, for the least, the lost, and the left behind, for the poor, the sick, and the afflicted. We are going to continue to fight for everyday Americans. That is why we are voting no on this bill, and to stop this reckless, regressive, and reactionary Republican shutdown, vote no.
The House will be in order. Members are reminded to direct their comments to the chair. The gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves.
Yes.
Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I recognize my very good friend, the distinguished gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Alford, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did not bring any fancy signs with me today. Those take hours to prepare, but I will tell you, if a shutdown occurs because we do not pass this continuing resolution today, it will not be a Republican shutdown. It will be a Democrat shutdown. And when it goes over to the Senate, it will be the Schumer shutdown.
We'll suspend. The gentleman will suspend. The House will come to order. The gentleman from Missouri has the floor. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this is not about millionaires. This is not about billionaires. This is about our farmers. This is about our military getting the pay that they deserve through the Christmas and New Year's. This is about the future of this nation. This continuing resolution, Mr. Speaker, before us, it is not a perfect solution. But this is a bridge that will allow us to continue the critical work of funding our troops, securing our border, supporting our farmers, caring for our veterans, and providing disaster relief for those in the Carolinas that we visited just last month, living in tents in freezing temperatures while illegal aliens are living at the Roosevelt Hotel in New York City.
The gentleman will suspend. The House will be in order. Allow the gentleman to be heard. It is his time. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Missouri has 87,000 farms. We are losing 1,000 farms in America each month. Our food security is national security, and the Democrats do not want to support our farmers because of the high inflationary costs that this administration has brought about and the low commodity prices. Farmers are going out of business. I don't understand this consolidation of farming in America and why the Democrats are in favor of that. We have got to support our farmers through this bill. We have got to support our disaster victims through this bill. And most of all, we must support America. We are not here for ourselves. We are here for those that we represent, the hardworking Americans who depend on us to set aside our differences and act with courage and responsibility. They deserve a government that works for them and not against us. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The chair would remind my colleagues to allow speakers to be heard. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
I just remind my colleague and friend from Missouri that the compromise bill had support for the farmers, overwhelming support for farmers and for American families as well. At this time, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, the distinguished ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Neal.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are in favor of every request that you asked for. These were modest agreements that were reached and rendered by both parties in an honest and public agreement. The Speaker of the House broke his word. That's why we're here. And to the gentleman from Missouri who just spoke, I've been here for a long time. You have never won a government shutdown, and you won't win this one either. Your currency in this institution is your word. We reached an agreement. We came to modest achievements. And a tweet changed all of it? Can you imagine what the next 2 years are going to be like if every time the Congress works its will and then there's a tweet, or from an individual who has no official portfolio, who threatens members on the Republican side with a primary, and they succumb? This institution has a separate responsibility based upon the separation of powers. Members of Congress don't serve under presidents of the United States. It's called the national principle. I'm in favor of aid to North Carolina. I'm in support of aid to the farmers in Missouri. We come to the aid of the American family at moments like this, but you walked away from your word. You walked away from an agreement. That's what we're bothered by. A simple suggestion from the president-elect that you ought to abandon that principle? And this is what this is about. This is trying to raise the debt ceiling to disguise a big tax cut that they want to offer later on. In December of 2017, the TCJA was rendered, and my friends, particularly the ones that have been here for a while, you know what I'm about to say is true. You borrowed the money for a tax cut. $2.3 trillion for a tax cut for wealthy people. And when you see the distribution tables, you know who got what. We are trying to avert a government shutdown, but we're also trying to subscribe to the basic principle as outlined earlier. We reached an agreement. It was honorable. It came to the aid of everything you've asked for. And then you walk away from it? What about your word going forward here? What about the currency that I noted a moment ago? And I want to tell you, you cannot win a government shutdown, and you won't win this one either. We need to return to the original agreement and stick with it. The last word here I'm going to offer is this.
It's expired.
The Speaker of the House needed to keep his word on this legislation.
The gentleman's time. The gentleman will suspend. The gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves. The chair would remind my colleagues to direct comments to the chair. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield to my good friend, the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Luna, for 2 minutes.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I've never actually voted for a CR, but I'm here today because I realize that the plan that's on the table currently to keep our government open, but also the promise from the only president in my lifetime who's ever followed through on all of his campaign promises to the American people. Excuse me, I'm not done talking. Give me the same respect we give you guys.
The House will come to order. My colleagues are reminded the gentlewoman has the floor. She has the right to be heard. The gentlewoman has the right to be heard, and the gentlewoman would be reminded to direct her comments to the chair. The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
From the only president in my lifetime who's fulfilled all of his campaign promises to the American people, has promised to cut hundreds of billions of dollars in reconciliation. You want to talk about shutting down the government. The deal that was negotiated was largely rejected by the American people, which, to Speaker Johnson's credit, pulled it from the floor, which is why we are here today. The deal on the table will keep the government open for the American people, and if you guys so choose to shut it down, it will be on you, but not the Republican Party. We will not be going back to the table. This deal stands as it is, so let you go back home on Christmas and explain to your people why you shut down the government, because we won't be doing it.
The House.
Furthermore, Mr. Speaker.
The House will be in order. The House will be in order. The gentlewoman is reminded to direct her comments to the chair. My colleagues are reminded to yield the floor to the gentlewoman from Florida.
Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the former bill had items in it to include random pandemic policies, biocontaminant research that were not in the best interest of the American people. So the deal on the table is as is. You either vote for or you vote for the shutdown, but it will be not on the Republican Party, but on Democrats as it stands. Mr. Speaker, I yield my time.
Gentlewoman yields. My colleagues, the chair acknowledges the emotion and passion behind all arguments. Please, the House will be in order. The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
A deal is a deal. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, the distinguished ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Pallone.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Have the Republicans forgotten that they're in the majority? The bill that was supposed to come up was posted and negotiated by the Republican Speaker. He posted it. He negotiated it. And you know that the bill that you're bringing up instead tonight will not pass. We will leave here tonight. This bill will not pass. And so you are the ones that are creating the shutdown. You have the power to decide what bills come to the floor. You are putting a bill on this floor that you know will not pass and will lead to a Republican shutdown. It's on you because you have the majority. Now, I want to talk about this other bill that was supposed to come up and that you refused to bring up. This bill was negotiated because we realized, for one, in our committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee, that people were suffering, right? They were suffering from high drug prices because of pharmaceutical benefit plans, PBMs, right? And so we put in the bill on a bipartisan basis a way of trying to bring prices down with PBM reform. We knew that consumers are being screwed all over the place, right? With shady things on website when they buy things, junk fees, all kinds of deceptive practices. So we put in on a bipartisan basis that we were going to get rid of junk fees, that we were going to get rid of deceptive practices, whether it went to a concert or a hotel or whatever it happened to be, because we cared on a bipartisan basis to try to bring prices down, to try to make things more fair for the consumer, for the American people. You took all that out. Why? Because a billionaire, Elon Musk, decided that we were going to act in favor, or the Republicans were supposed to act in favor of corporate interests, in favor of billionaires, in favor of special interests. That's what's going on here. You jettisoned all the things that we worked on a bipartisan basis to try to bring prices down, be fair to the American people, protect the consumer, protect the environment, protect safety, and instead you decide to simply go ahead with something that you know will not pass, that will shut the government down. Don't tell me this is on our watch. This is on your watch. You're the majority. You're responsible. This is not going to pass. The government's going to shut down, and the American people are going to suffer because of you as Republicans. I yield back.
Colleagues are reminded to direct their comments to the chair. The gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, we've had a lot of talk about what's not in this bill. Maybe we ought to talk a little bit about what's in this bill. It keeps the government open, which my friends say they want to do, and I think they're sincere in that. This does that. It provides relief to people in the various disaster areas around the country at an amount that they agree to, and we agree to, and we share that in common. It provides aid for farmers who've suffered through several years of droughts and disaster and a systemic crisis that, as my friend from Missouri mentioned, is costing us farms. It extends important health care provisions into the next year. There's nothing in here you're against. There's not a single thing in this bill that you oppose. So if you can't vote for what you're for, please don't lecture us about what, if I had this and this and this, I'd vote for it. You vote no, you're voting to shut down the government. If you vote no, you're voting to deny aid to people with disaster. If you vote no, you're voting against helping American farmers and ranchers at a difficult time. And if you vote no, you're voting to strip important provisions that are being extended into next year. Why? Because you don't want to give the next president enough time to get organized. And you want to use the debt to leverage. The extension of the debt ceiling is what we've done for the last 2 years. It's what you supported 2 years ago. There's no change in that whatsoever. So if you want to fight other things and other battles, that's great. I welcome that debate. I think it's a legitimate debate. But you're voting against a bill that everything in it you support. Every single thing. and you're doing that for political purposes. So please don't lecture us about that. We present something that keeps the government open, that provides aid to people, that provides support for farmers, that extends important provisions, and you're not opposed to any of that, and yet you're going to oppose the bill. And if a government shutdown comes, and I sincerely hope it does not, please don't tell us that those of us that voted to keep the government open while you voted to let it close are somehow responsible. That's just not the case. So, you know, I have a rule as a legislator. I never vote against a bill because of what's not in it. I vote on the basis of the bill that comes here, and then I fight for the other things that I think are important. And extending a debt ceiling that we've done for 2 years in a bipartisan fashion so you can use it as leverage against a new president is something you ought to reconsider as a political tactic. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman reserves. Members are reminded to direct their comments to the chair. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Moskowitz.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, denial is not just a river in Egypt. Let's talk about the last 2 years. It was the Democrats who raised the debt ceiling, not the Republicans last time. Many of you voted against it. It was the Democrats who kept over the government, not once, not twice, but every single time we needed to keep the government open, it was the Democrats who kept the government open. More of us voted for it than you. And all I've heard for the last couple of weeks about it, this giant mandate, landslide, trifecta. Put on your big boy pants, pass your own bill. We're only here because you guys can't agree amongst yourselves. So hold on a second. Democrats will keep government open for the American people. We will mediate the disagreements between that side of the room and that side of the room. We will do that for you, but you got to at least invite us to that meeting. So if you want us to solve your problem because you can't agree amongst yourselves, reach out. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Time has expired. The gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Connecticut.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady. When I ran for Congress in 2018, the debt was $21 trillion. I was just texting with my son back home in Austin, who I haven't seen in quite a long time because I'm here trying to fight for him. When I got through cancer about 12 years ago, I made my promise to my kids that I would do everything I can to save this country. And what we're doing right now is to continue to double down on the things that are destroying the republic. We are going to increase the debt ceiling, not just $4 trillion, that's false. We have spent $4.7 trillion in additional debt in the last 19 months. We're going to increase the debt by $5 trillion. That's what's going to happen right here by Republicans, increasing the debt $5 trillion. And what are you doing in the same bill? $110 billion unpaid for, because you never have any ounce of self-respect to go out and campaign saying you're going to balance the budget, and then you come in here and pass $110 billion unpaid for. On top of the $200 billion you did for WEP, you guys won't agree with that, but the fact of the matter is $330 billion. Congratulations, you've added to the debt since you were given the majority again on November 5th. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. Yes, I think this bill is better than it was yesterday on certain respects, but to take this bill yesterday and congratulate yourself because it's shorter in pages but increases the debt by $5 trillion is asinine. And that's precisely what Republicans are doing. I am absolutely sickened by a party that campaigns on fiscal responsibility and has the temerity to go forward to the American people and say, you think this is fiscally responsible. It is absolutely ridiculous. It also turns off pay-go. It turns off the $1.7 trillion in automatic cuts under pay-go, because this side of the aisle is profoundly unserious about actually reducing deficits, just as my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are profoundly unserious about reducing deficits. The entire body has been racking up debt for my entire life. $36 trillion, $1 trillion of interest. We rack up $1 trillion every 100 days. And what are we going to do about it? We're going to run around and talk about cutting taxes, but not doing what's necessary to cut the spending along with the cut taxes. My other side of the aisle, my colleagues will say, oh no, we got to increase taxes, but we'll do anything to cut spending. And so here we sit in the same mess. And I got to be honest, I want to remind people, this is Article 1. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
This is a great debate. Nice to have the discussion, but we're here to consider a specific piece of legislation. This keeps the government open. What my friends want to do by voting no is effectively to shut it down. This provides relief to people in need. What my friends want to do by voting no is to keep that from happening. This provides aid to farmers and ranchers. What my friends want to do, and they actually favor the amounts and what have you, there's been no change in that regard, ends that. This extends important protections for the American people. So if a bill's got something in it and you support everything that's in it, and we continue the debt ceiling that we've had the last 2 years, then I'm mystified as to how you can go home and explain that, as I wanted to keep the government open, so I voted to shut it down. It's amazing to me. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Connecticut.
Mr. Speaker, I am prepared to close.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma.
I still have speakers, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to my very good friend from Ohio, the distinguished chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jordan.
Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, this bill is real simple. This bill helps the people who grow our food. Right. This bill helps people who were devastated by hurricanes this past fall. Right. And this bill funds the government at levels the Democrats agreed to. Right. To keep the government open over the holidays. Why the Democrats are opposed to this, I have no idea. I have no idea. So let's vote yes and spend at the levels everyone agreed to. And then in 3 months, we can have the debate and figure out where we're going from there. But this is a yes vote. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman's recognized.
I yield.
Gentleman reserves.
I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. There are a lot of things in here that were taken out of the compromise bill that were good for the American people. And one of the things was dish payments, where you give money to hospitals that treat the least among us, the poorest people that need health care, and that was taken out of the bill. That's cruel, inhuman, and anti-Judeo-Christian. And that's one of the main reasons why I oppose this bill, because the hospitals that take care of those people are doing God's work, and they need to be given the monies they've been given in the past, a 1-year extension, and you took that out. That's wrong. I oppose the bill. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. Gentlewoman reserves.
Yes.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman, my good friend from New York, Mr. Lawler.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, we are approaching Christmas and Hanukkah. And Americans all across this country care about this debate. They care about the specifics. But what they won't understand is when you vote no to continue funding the government to provide the services that they rely on. This is a clean CR. If you don't like it because it doesn't have a whole list of ornaments on the Christmas tree, I'm sorry. But the fact is that we are keeping the government funded. By the way, I would remind my Democratic colleagues, we could actually do our appropriations work if my senior senator from New York passed a single solitary appropriations bill on the Senate floor. He passed exactly 0. The fact is, we have to keep the government funded. That is our responsibility.
An additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
We have to keep the government funded, live to fight another day. The fact is that we are not shutting the government down before Christmas. And I think everyone here has a responsibility to keep the government open and funded, and it requires a yes vote on this CR. It requires a yes vote on disaster relief. It requires a yes vote on providing our farmers the support that they need to put food on the table of the American people. And with that, I yield back to the chairman.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman's recognized.
Yes. Speaker, I'm prepared to close.
Gentleman reserves.
The chair, I'm also prepared to close.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
The American public has been clamoring for this body to work together, Democrats and Republicans, across the aisle, to do what is in the best interest of the American people. To that end, and to give credence to what the American people are clamoring for, so they begin to have trust in us again and what we do in this body, is that we've been working since last August of 2023, on a supplemental disaster relief bill. We worked assiduously over the next several months, day in and day out. And I will just say to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I recognize I am part of what's called the Four Corners, and it was the Four Corners of the appropriate. So we worked hard over the last several weeks, back and forth and back, to say, we can accept this, we can't accept that. We will do this, we will do that. We worked hard. And to talk about what some of my colleagues have said, the Democrats are in the minority in this body. When you have the pen, which is what the Republicans have, they write the bill. They write the bill. They post the bill. They agreed on a bill.
They signed it.
And you know what? They got scared because President Musk told them, President Musk said, don't do it. Don't do it. Shut the government down. Imagine. What does he know about what people go through is when the government shuts down? Are his employees furloughed? Hell no. Is he furloughed? No. And when you shut the government down, people don't get paid. And maybe if none of us got paid if the government shut down, some people on the other side of the aisle would feel differently about where we're going in this effort. We had an agreement. But you know, this is not different from what we've experienced over the last year and a half or so. Think about it. Biden, McCarthy, deal, come together. Next day, walk away. Johnson, Schumer, deal. Next day, walk away. And now this deal, walk away from it. Who do we trust in this body? And above all, can the American people trust us? trust us with their lives, when we had a moment, when we came to agreement as Democrats and Republicans, and then we were able to say, let's move forward this country. You know, one of my colleagues, I think it was Congressman Neal, who said this: the only currency we have in this body is our word. That's our credibility. That's our bond with each other. And when you break that bond, you break the ability to try to come together and be able to govern on behalf of the people of this country. What was left out of this bill, I understand what's in it, but what's left out is unconscionable, particularly in the areas of maternal
Gentlewoman's
mortality.
time has expired.
I implore my colleagues to vote no on this bill.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire how much time I have left?
1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman's recognized.
It's been an interesting debate. It's been a good debate. It's been a lot of interesting points made. But the fact is, there's nothing in this legislation that you oppose. You don't oppose keeping the government open. This keeps it open until March 14th. We're going to be voting for that in overwhelming numbers. You support aid to people in distress. This bill does that. You're going to be voting no. We're going to be voting yes. We think the rural economy is in crisis. There's important aid in here for it. Aid, you support it. We're going to be voting for it. You're going to be voting against it. That's just the facts. You consider legislation one piece at a time. There's not a single thing in here that you oppose, except maybe the debt limit extension, which is the same debt limit extension you supported 2 years ago. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes and keep the government open, help people in need, help the rural economy, and let us move forward with our work. With that, Mr. Speaker, I urge passage of the bill and yield back.
Gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill, H.R. 10515? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, for what purpose does the gentlewoman from Connecticut seek recognition?
Guess what? I request a recorded vote.
Does the gentlewoman ask?
And nays.
With great surprise, the yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 174, the nays are 235, one voting present, two-thirds not being in the affirmative. The rules are not suspended and the bill is not passed. Oh, thank you. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the House will stand in recess subject to the call of the chair.